r/AskReddit. Previously homeless people. Reddit, what are your stories? I was 16-17 at the time and living with my dad and his wife, not my mom. I moved there about 2 years before that due to my real mom booting me out. My dad had supported his wife financially for years so that she could write a book. And when it was finally signed, niche textbook, she said to him, choose me or your son. So dad said he chose his son and we left to a trailer park. 2 weeks later he changed his mind. Left me with $200 and went crawling back to her. I couldn't keep up the rent at the trailer park and was kicked out soon enough. So I stayed with a few friends here and there until the goodwill ran out. Unfortunately, because my father earned too much money, the government would not give me welfare even though my father was under instruction by his wife not to contact me or give me money. I slummed it till I was 18, at which point I could get welfare as an adult and slowly dragged myself back into society doing odd IT jobs here and there. Grew it into a business. Went to uni. Sold the business and started another. Sold it and went to a corporate job. And now I'm in another corporate job and about to start another business again. How I did it? Spite. Great work. There is nothing I hate more in this world than denying someone a childhood. When love is replaced by fear, there is something wrong. My partner and I intend to set up some kind of charity in this regard to help children like you and I who need help during this important time. It's a long-term dream but something I have to do. I'd love to get in on that. 2. I have long wished I could take in fosters or something. But just having my daughter's friends over, the ones from troubled homes, tends to send me into flashbacks too much. I don't know if I will ever be far enough past that. But financially, to help those who are willing to step in more with those kids, I'm all over that. If I end up in business for myself again at some point, I'd like to set up some work-study type jobs for some kids. 2. I was a homeless child. Myself along with my little brother. Mom and dad. We lived in a Chevrolet Nova in Seattle in the early 80s. I remember working in the field picking strawberries with my mom and brother. I would often fall asleep in a strawberry row and eat all the strawberries I could for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. My dad had a cocaine habit and we lost all of our money right before the homeless stint. He would fish sometimes and bring home salmon, which I detest the taste of to this day. My mom sold her wedding ring for $4 in gas because we had run out on the highway. We spent Christmas in a parking garage where I received a typewriter, yay, and a book while my mom sobbed. We would stay at the shelter occasionally but they separated women and men and wouldn't let you lock your door. My mom wasn't scrappy, but she got into a couple of fights there when people tried to steal our clothes. So they decided it wasn't safe, so we stayed in our car a lot. When in the car, we would roll newspapers up in the windows so people couldn't see in. We still had someone come one night and try to get in our car. I don't know why he wanted in, but my dad had to go outside and make him leave. My brother and I slept head to foot in the backseat and it was pretty uncomfortable. All of this and I can say I turned out okay. I am raising a little boy on my own, but he is well provided for and we are stable. He has never had to know hunger or want or the loss of stability, because I've really made it one of my life's missions to keep him happy, health, and stable. I have a wonderful relationship with my mom, but my father disappeared after the homeless deal, and I never saw him again. I found out he died in 2007 from lung cancer and I actually contacted him for the first and only time 2 weeks before he died, via mail. That's another story for another thread, though. Being homeless made me appreciate the small things, luxuries and the like. Sometimes I am angry at all the homeless people I see because I feel that a lot of them are flying the cardboard credit card and giving other homeless people a bad name. As I have matured, however, I realize it's not my place to judge and everyone has their story and everyone is fighting their own battle. Sometimes I want to write a book about it, but I don't think anyone would be interested, so this is the closest I'll probably ever come. Thanks for reading. I'd read your book. I would read the hit out of that book. Do you have any sort of relationship with your father? Did he ever look back or offer any assistance at all after he left? My father attempted to enter our lives again when we were teenagers. He moved back to the city we grew up in with his new family. But he didn't offer any assistance to us or our mother. Actually, he sued our mother for possessions of his that he left behind that she sold when he left. And he got the money. So quite the opposite. He took money from us. My sister forgave him, but I was not so willing. He and I only started speaking recently. Due to my engagement. I am very close with my grandparents and cousins from his side of the family. So I figured it was in the family's best interest if I at least started speaking to him again. After watching the Ronald Davis viral video about the homeless man in Chicago, it inspired me to seek out these people. Make them a home-cooked meal with a small table, silverware, plates and everything, and have a conversation with them in a quiet area outside. I call it the Human First Project, and its main focus is to treat them like human beings. I've only done it twice so far, but I'm planning to do it on a regular basis. About once every 2 weeks. I don't really have a real purpose and I have no idea what I even want from doing this. But it's helped me understand a lot of things. I've found that it's a lot easier than I thought to become homeless. And it's almost damn near impossible to get out of it without significant help. These people need our help. I would like to see this program across the US. If you are anywhere near Texas, PM me. I would like to help out. I was homeless for a little over a year. Long story short, got addicted to heroin. Everyone I knew disowned me. And I slept in bus stops and random unlocked cars for a year. It sucked. Real bad. It wasn't until I posted a random ad on Craigslist begging someone to take me in and help me get clean. A kind stranger, who is one of my best friends and sponsor now, took me in. Locked me in his house. And I haven't touched heroin in over 4 years. I owe my life to him. I am now a proud father of a little boy and a firefighter/EMT. Some people just have such a good heart. And he saw more than a junkie in me. I will forever be grateful for him. Damn. I hope your other kid turns out to be just as successful as the firefighter one. You are not alone. Just keep soldiering on. You've obviously got a good head on your shoulders. Stop drinking and focus on the positives. This is why people should stop complaining about homeless people with iPhones. It could be from the job that Ishi has so that Ishi can get her life back on track. Got out of the army, honorably, with a back injury from an airborne accident. Pay stops. VA pay starts. VA begins deductions to satisfy debt incurred while in service. VA pay no longer covers living expenses. Denied unemployment benefits by the state of NC because of the VA pay I receive and don't receive. Get evicted. Debts begin adding up. Take offer to live with family member that claims to rarely be at the home. Find out he is there the majority of the time. Is a blackout abusive drunk who is charging me twice the mortgage he pays in rent. Can't deal with that. Hit is in storage. I'm homeless. VA is still threatening to deduct more and the NC unemployment I paid into is still off limits. Still homeless. Still can't cover old bills. There are supposedly many ways I could help myself to government programs. Which takes months, years to get approval. I don't know. Kind of at my breaking point. Are you in Fayetteville? I'm in Morganton at a friend's right now. I'm hoping to get back down to FT. Brag soon so I can see where everything went wrong and restabilize. I'll try to make this as TLDR as possible. I was 14 and an only child. After moving every year to a new rundown building with my single heavy drinking crack smoking mother. I come home from school one day to see her gone. She ran away and left me in an unpaid for apartment with my 3 cats. After a few days, I started to find homes for my cats. I miss them. I slept in a foodless rundown apartment for a few weeks until the landlord came and kicked me out. Luckily for me, I built up the courage to mention what was going on to a friend at school. He told his dad and they took me in. I ended up being part of the family for a good while. Eventually I started dating said friend. It made living with them complicated and awkward. But still okay. After like 4 months there, my mom found my number somehow and told me she was back in the city and found an apartment for us. Remember guys? This was my mommy. The only parent I had. I was so happy she was back. And I made the mistake of moving in with her and her BF. A few months later, we were getting evicted, and we went back to the family shelter. After a week there, I came home from school and the shelter front desk said I wasn't allowed in. I said why? She said because my mother left. I couldn't believe this. I slept in my school's bleachers, the roof, or anywhere I could find. One day, another friend took me in. Turned out to be a friend who took in one of my cats. I lived there for almost 3 years and they were some of the funniest years of my life. I'd forgotten about my mom. Until one day 3 years later at age 17. We saw my mom one day on the street corner while driving home. We didn't stop to see her. But I was a wreck for weeks. Eventually at 18 or 19, I met an amazing guy. Moved out and got married. And all the while my mom was God knows where. My mom came back into my life when I got pregnant in 2011. But she's gone again and I couldn't care less. But I don't want to get too into that because it is unrelated to my homeless story. When I was cut off after flunking out of college and coming out to my parents, I was basically homeless. I knew a friend who had moved in with her boyfriend, leaving her house empty. So in an unscrupulous time in my life, I took to squatting there. I moved in October, when it was still relatively warm out, and kept a low profile, no lights after evening began. Keeping the AC and the heat low. Stealing out in the morning for work and going in the back after. Winter descended. And soon the warmest it was in the house was something like 50 degrees. It was awful. She found out and wasn't terribly upset. She could afford the place and had only left a few pieces of furniture in the house. And knew that I was in need and I then reimbursed her for the low impact I had on her bills. I was able to save up enough to live with friends by May. I do miss that house now. I was surprisingly nice. And I can only imagine what it would be like now living there with my family. And with nice furniture. It was there that I learned the value of humility, perseverance, and to a much lesser extent self-sufficiency. Despite the fact that I was squatting and illegally living there, I had no support from family for the first time ever. My fiancé was homeless on and off for a few years as a result of some bad decisions on his part and a lack of support from his family. His family allowed him to drop out of school at a young age, yet pushed him out the door when he turned 18 and basically said, "Good luck." We would hang out most days. And every evening he would start desperately contacting people he knew to see if he could sleep on their couch that night. I'll never forget how sad he would get if he couldn't find a place to crash. Because that meant he had to sleep outside. He spent the rest of his time trying to find a job. But no one would hire him because he didn't graduate high school. So he would resort to stealing and dealing drugs just to survive. He's doing better now. We have our own place. He has a car, got his GED, has a good job, and is working on a college degree. But he had to work 10 times as hard just to catch up. And I think that had a pretty big impact on him. He swears that our children will never be allowed to drop out of school. And that no matter what age our child is, we'll always allow them to come back home if they don't have a place to stay. His family allowed him to drop out of school at a young age, yet pushed him out the door when he turned 18 and basically said, "Good luck." Parents should be responsible for their children all their lives. You created that problem. Now you take care of it. I was brought into this world against my will. So, you don't get to call it quits and kick me out at 18. It's like having a pit bull and then letting it loose on the streets. No longer being responsible for what it does after 5 years. Doug Stanhope. Brand new material from yesterday night's gig in Edmonton. Rough transcription. I was a bit drunk. I was homeless for a few months by choice, was just sick of paying rent. Wasn't making much money and was about 20. Just wanted to have fun all the time. Not your traditional hobo, I suppose. I spent maybe 1/2 of the time couch surfing and 1/2 of the time camping in parks legally. I kept my full-time job the whole time. Now that I'm almost 30, I've converted a van into a camper and I'm about to try the van dweller lifestyle for the same reason. Sick of rent. I make much more money now, so I'm planning on putting that saved rent money towards a piece of land to build a little house on. Okay, but if you do build a house, make sure you build a secret underground bunker that only you know about. If you ever need to sell the house, live in the bunker instead. Is your van down by a river? I was asked by my mother to leave college and come home to help her take care of my seriously ill stepfather. I did. I got a job. Contributed to the household financially. Cleaned the house. They kicked me out after 4 months and let me know that I would need to find a way to pay my rent. I took it as a positive, cool, apartment searching with my mom. Nope. They had a place and had signed a lease, which I also needed to co-sign. Not sure why I agreed. Though I was 17 at the time. Got in a physically abusive relationship. Wigged out. Had him arrested after the most violent horrifying night that far. Moved back to an RV on my mother's property. No electricity. Mother and stepdad decided, on their own, without any input from me, to bail him out and give him another chance when I was finally starting to deal with everything that had happened. He came back. Still violent. Figured I had to accept it now. Since it seemed okay with my mom. I was stupid. Left home to live in a van for 10 months while I tried to find a job. Was in a battered women's shelter briefly. Ate from food pantries, always ashamed when they had to ask if I had the capacity to refrigerate food and I had to say no. Got vouchers for gas for the van so I could attempt to find work. Found a job. Worked while living in my van for a couple more months. Got an apartment. Lived like a normal human. It totally gave me a better outlook. I cannot stand people complaining about how hard they have it. As crappy as living in my car was. There were so many people without nearly as much good fortune as I had. I feel happy that I work, make money, pay bills, eat food I pay for. I have a great job now from which I sit at my desk to write this. I still have scars from the physical abuse. I will never understand how my mother could think it was a good idea to bail him out. I would want to destroy anyone who would do to my child what he did to me. I take responsibility for my failings and my success. Turns out they dump homeless people all over the US of A. So I'm in Seattle. I keep working at my job. Trying to make money. Trying to make things okay until I can be with my fiancé. So here I am in Seattle. They are trans friendly and let me stay in the female shelters. Me, I have a feminized voice and try to blend in as best I can, but I'm not all that passable yet. But I'm doing okay. I make a few friends and try to keep working. And 2 months later, after arriving in Seattle, my fiancé tells me I can't do this anymore. She ditches me. She ditches me for a guy whom she knows I ducking loathe and hate. And tells me she can't handle all the ducked up hit that happens to me anymore. She was the last person I had. The last person in my life that meant anything to me, and she completely devastated me by leaving. He abuses her. He uses her and they break up 2 months. I have given up at this point. I start working furiously. Trying to forget what's happening. I start putting in 8-9 hours of work a day in a job that tires most people out after 3-5 hours. I push myself over the edge. Hook up with random people who are trying to duck trans girls. I eventually got all the money I needed and wanted and eventually burned out and broke down. After a bout with depression and cutting. Dealing with my circumstances. I eventually was let go from my job. I used the money I had left to buy a brand new laptop that could handle any game that I could throw at it. My last prized possession before being plunged into extreme poverty. At least the games would help me cope. I eventually was offered into a program that helps homeless women try to get stable. And I get placed in a permanent shelter that lets the persons who get accepted into the program stay for a year. 7 months later I qualify for a program for women. For being trans and a rape victim. As well as other vulnerability factors. I get selected for a subsidized housing apartment. And now here I am. No longer homeless. But completely defeated. But I have a few really cool friends now. They've helped me come out of my shell and not be so afraid of the world. I'm still deathly afraid of people. And I won't leave my apartment without a knife and an old cell phone to call police. All I do now is play video games and browse forums. Hoping that one day I'll be okay. Hoping that one day I'll get the chance to be a loving significant other again. I don't know if that's going to happen. Though. Life is still pretty imbalanced for me. That's one hell of a story. Thank you for telling it. I hope you're doing well now. Let's just say life has its ups and downs. Rather than specific instances, here are some general tips. Get a good wind up alarm clock. Power is not a guarantee. Getting up on time should be. Find a local uni, community college, whatever. Students fall asleep in lobbies all the time, and if they have pay, they have showers. Find a day labor service. A lot of them are work today, paid today, because if you are hand to mouth, waiting a couple of weeks to get paid can kill you. Hygiene. 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 If you smell like a sock, crashing at the uni won't work. If you are the clean guy who isn't afraid to work the day, a labor joint will send you out on better jobs. They want to keep the client right. Basically, every interaction you have that might get you out of this situation gets better with $5 worth of toiletries. There was a really good AMA from a formerly homeless guy and his cat Bob. Just yesterday. You should check it out. Nothing will top the guy in the tree. Johnny Buck? I feel relevant. I know what you're talking about. I was kicked out when I was 19 for drinking. My parents caught me with beer. I was in college and it was mid-semester. I slept in an abandoned shed near my school's campus and washed in the bathroom before class for about 2 weeks in January. Somebody on campus found out what I was doing and got me a job on campus. It barely made ends meet. But I am content with very little now. What? Homeless because of beer? Yes. My dad was a pastor. Methamphetamine and heroin. Homeless a year. Now I'm a software engineer with a BS in physics from a well-known school. How was it? Always a sense of urgency. But really, shelter and food came second to getting a fix and peddling what drugs I could to support my habit. Met a lot of scary, sad and ducked up people. Got convicted of distribution and some prescription forgery charges. People always ask me where I slept. Short answer. I didn't. I passed out and usually woke up on strange places. Drained emotionally and broke or flat out robbed. Then do it all over again. So I was a former homeless youth. Meaning I was without a home for much of my teenage years, 8-14. Eventually the state came in and took me away from my then mother, who really doesn't deserve that title. But another story for later. The stories of that time aren't fun. Constantly not knowing where you are going to sleep at, what you are going to eat for dinner, or what tomorrow will be like is frightening. Especially for a kid. I hated breaks off from school. Because that meant I wouldn't eat alert. Most of the food I ate was the school free lunch program. I didn't have a lot of friends. Because I couldn't share alert with them. Or tell them where I lived. Or why they couldn't spend the night at my house. The state put me into foster care. And eventually I found my way into a really awesome family. I love them. They love me. And I've been with them for almost a decade. I went from having nothing to almost having everything. I've become somewhat successful. And hope to enter public office one day. Although my childhood sucked. I would never wish it upon anyone. Nor would I want to go back and change it. Because it made me who I am today. I know what it was like to be broken and lonely and have nothing. And I will never go back. Me and my mother were homeless for quite some time when I was about 2 years old. I obviously don't remember much about it. But I've heard stories about it from her and some of her friends who helped us. We eventually managed to find people who would let us sleep on a couch or even just on the floor. But there was a solid 6 months or so where my mother didn't know anyone in town. So we were on our own. The homeless shelters in town were filled most nights with drug addicts and the mentally ill. So my mother tended to avoid those unless the weather was particularly bad. Her sister moved into the city. And together with some of the friends she had made, helped get us a little place. And my mother started working in kitchens. She's a fantastic cook. And had worked in restaurants for years. But not having a fixed address tends to make getting work difficult. Once we were more stable, she went back to school and got her heavy-duty mechanic certification. She went into the railroad and spent almost a decade working her dream job as a locomotive mechanic. Before the corruption in the industry drove her to leave, the management would refuse to allow mechanics to fix all but the most serious problems and would load as many cars on a train as possible, leading to far more breakdowns and derailments. She spent the last few years working for our city's transit company, repairing the diesel buses. These engines are too small for her liking. So she's working to get the proper certification to start working on those massive transport ships. We were never affluent by any means. But my mother's trade meant that she could find good work wherever we went. And we were always pretty comfortable. She now lives on her own again, seeing as I've moved out. And she seems to be enjoying that pretty well. She's starting her own burlesque troupe that all my friends want to join. Yeah. She does this thing where she treats all my friends like her children, helping them out and going to their school events and whatnot. I work in kitchens now, have a hella rad punk band, and share a house with a bunch of awesome artist folks. I'd say we did pretty well. Your mom sounds cool. Diesel engines? Meh, not big enough. I was working as a Y2K analyst for a Fortune 500 company in Portland, Oregon. Once that gig was up, and the dot-com bubble hit hardest, I was out of work. I used my unemployment for 6 months, and when that ran out, couldn't get a job anywhere in Oregon. Moved to Utah with my also unemployed girlfriend as she got a job opportunity there. We literally drove out with what our cars could carry and found an empty house in Provo and squatted there. There were 3-4 more houses on that half-sized block also uninhabited. We got lucky and found the house whose power was still on. We lived there 6 months when the owner came by. He said thanks for keeping the crackheads out of the place, and let us stay there. He owned all of those empty houses. Girlfriend wound up managing, then buying the business and the property it was on within a couple years, and I wound up working for eBay as an entry-level support dude. From there we eventually moved out of the empty house, got an apt, then bought house. The 4,000 shares of eBay stock didn't suck, and I have since moved through the ranks in increasingly better IT jobs ever since. It was definitely a life-changing event going from having a really good income to zero in 6 months. Then living on ramens and squatting. Always wondering if we were going to get kicked out. I definitely have empathy for people living paycheck to paycheck and finding themselves evicted and living in their car when their job goes away for whatever reason. I'm now an addict in recovery and was homeless for a period of about a month and a half due to my addiction and family distancing themselves from me. I found a couple people I used to use with, and they had set up in an empty apartment that had zero furniture. It wasn't ours. It was me, 2 gay guys and one of their sisters. I slept on the floor of that empty apartment every night and got eaten up by whatever bugs were crawling around in the carpet. I still have scars from scratching. I tried to hold down a job, but with no transportation and limited hygienic capabilities, it eventually fell through. It was rough. Whatever money I did make was spent on ramen and 87-cent 2-liter bottles of root beer from Walmart. I eventually manipulated my mother into letting me move in with her, and I received even more consequences after that. It's a very depressing position to be in, and it can be very difficult to establish what the solution to that situation could be and how to put it into action. A large percentage of homeless people often have some kind of disorder or issue that contributes as to why they can't fight their way out of homelessness. I've known many bipolar or schizophrenic homeless people who have no access to proper medical care. One thing that I want to stress to everyone who reads this is that homeless people are still people who are probably in a very bad spot in their lives that they have yet to find a way out of. After I got clean, I was able to put a life together, but that was only after some serious legal intervention and the help of family. I believe it made me a better person, because I have been subjected to things that many people only see in passing and give little recognition. It's hard. Mine started at a pretty young age. My mom died when I was in 7th grade. My dad, unable to cope, resorted to alcohol abuse, which ended up with me being physically abused. Around the time I was 16, I had figured it to be much easier to live life away from the toxic environment. I had help from friends and friends' parents who understood the situation and would let me couch surf. Thankfully, in high school I was accepted into an early college program. After I graduated, I had started working the day after graduation as a full-time employee of a Subway. Making a little more than minimum wage due to my boss having sympathy on me, I ended up getting my own apartment at the young age of 19. As of now, I currently study at the local community college while working full-time at a large retailer, Walmart. As for my dad, he passed a few months ago. Me and my siblings had dropped contact with him after my move out. I was the youngest and they had already started their lives away from home. When we received the news we had no words, but he died to us a long time ago. Sure, I feel that I may have been robbed of my glorious high school years. But seeing where I am now and how bad it could have turned out, I am quite frankly proud of myself. But there is always more work to do. I was around 16 when my family and I became homeless. Around 2009 to 2010 my great-grandmother died at the hospital. Me and my family were renting from her. We lived in a duplex. A bit like two small houses on top of each other. We had the downstairs one. She owned the top. My grandma was living with her as well. After her death, suddenly all of my grandma's sisters, 5 including her, wanted to sell the house. Of course. This being the only place my family could afford. We all, including my grandma, protested. In 2012, it was sold. They barely even helped us move out. Just showed up once and helped one day. Maybe to justify getting money for the house. A couple days after my birthday, around July, we were living in a motel room. I can't describe the weird feeling. It's like you want to go home after spending a few weeks away. But then you realize you can't. All the sisters got their money, including my grandma. She looked for a new house. My mom and little brother tried to live with my grandpa but broke down and refused to live there. My older sister rented a place from her friend. And my younger sister went to stay at my uncle's house. I traveled with my grandma in search of a new place to live. After a few months, my mom got an apartment and we all lived there for a year. It wasn't great, seeing as how 5-6 people are living in a 2-bedroom apartment. After that, we rented a house. Now here. This isn't my story, but it's my dad's. His family was a Swedish migrant family that lived in Iowa but later moved to Indiana. He had a good childhood, but after high school he couldn't afford college. So he basically just roamed across the country, sleeping in a car and doing odd jobs until he eventually became a farmhand in Eureka, California. After a few years of this he was tired of it. He moved back to Indiana by living out of his car all the way and then had a hard time searching for a job. Eventually he started working graveyard shift at a factory that paid $15 an hour. So this was a big break for him. Then after he got a house, he met my mom who worked at another factory. But when my brother was born, both factories shut down, leaving them without work. My dad then just took a job as a mailman. 2 kids and 20 years later both of my parents have good jobs. Dad's still a mailman and he loves it. We have a nice house. And my brother is in college to be an eye surgeon. My family used to be a poor family from when they moved here to America to about the 1980s. Now everyone in my family is well off. My family elders have also taught us to never take anything for granted because they didn't have that stuff. My grandfather lived in a shack in Iowa. This story may be somewhat irrelevant, but I hope it's a good read. I went to live in a shelter for some time when I was 14. I made friends with this one older guy who taught me how to roll cigarettes. Got me drunk for the first time and was overall pretty chill. Well, one day he and I started yelling at each other and I called him a loser. So for the next 3 days he kept making comments to others that he was going to kill me, and he was reported and kicked out. For 2 months he stalked me at that place. When I went to school I'd see him across the street from where I would be picked up. He knew where I went to school, wasn't too far away, and I'd occasionally see him when I left, just sitting across the street next to a WIC building. Eventually he stopped, but whenever I see a tall hippie looking guy I do a double take. He previously did 15 years for armed robbery or something. Me and my boyfriend spent about a year couch surfing and squatting basically. We slept on friends' sofas or spare rooms when available and then ended up squatting in a house with acquaintances. Sometimes when there was nowhere to go we would just ride around in circles on the night bus. It was awful. Looking back, the reason we were homeless was because we were drug addicts, but it was easier to have nowhere permanent to stay than to not have something up my nose. I remember having to buy a month's worth of food with £5. I was starving and cold as there were no windows, got smashed in, or heating. Eventually the owner of the house ended up coming back to UK to check out his empty property, found a bunch of kids squatting in his house and gave us a month to move out. A very distant relative took us in and that alone was enough to make me sort my hit out. I couldn't take advantage of someone who was helping us out. Didn't take any drugs for a while, got a job and saved up enough to move out within 2 months. Yeah, it's changed me. Whenever things get bad I just think, hey, at least I have somewhere to sleep tonight. And I have a job where I earn minimum wage, but oh my god do I feel rich. This will be buried, but I was homeless for a brief time back in 2009-2010. I had returned from NY to stay with my mom and stepdad to be told I had 4 days to find something and I had to leave. I panicked and stayed with a friend for a few days. It was tough sleeping on his floor. I looked for jobs all day every day and couldn't find anything. I have an older brother and sister and I asked if I could crash at their places for a bit. My sister took me in for 2 days before saying I couldn't stay anymore. My brother had a house he rented out and let me stay for 2 days before. Well dude, you can't pay rent, so you have to leave. Thankfully my mind clicked. My best friend had offered months before for me to come out to his college and stay with him rent-free for a few months. I was grateful to hear that news in mid-January of 2010. I had 10.00 when I went to stay with him. I spent that 10.00 on all the food I could buy to survive the next few weeks. Of course $10 in food goes really quick, making 3 meals a day. I slept in his hallway on a small bed that I could not fit on, but it was a roof over my head. I starved for 4 weeks before my father sent me $300 to get food with. I will never forget the night before the funds clearing my account. The feeling of absolute helplessness as I waited to fuel my starving body. Now 4 weeks is a long time. I wasn't totally not eating, just had really small meals, nothing. I could not begin to describe the euphoria I got stocking my pantry at that house with all sorts of food I dreamed about. I have never recovered from glowing words said by my sister when I was on the verge of being on the streets in the middle of winter. She told me while we were driving back to my mom's house, "Well, there's plenty of woods around here, I'd buy a tent." I have never recovered the deep hole my sister and brother put me in when I was in absolute need. I will always turn the other cheek on them if they need a place to stay at my spot. But it will always hurt me. I'll always remember what they said to me during my weakest point. I was never so freaked out in my life, being almost homeless. Couldn't afford college tuition at university. And really did not want to return to my family. So, the university was very unorganized and I managed to live in their dorms for about 7 months illegally before leaving to stay elsewhere with friends. I couldn't get mail and I didn't have a phone for most of the time. And food was a constant struggle. But eventually began working as a home health aide. Then took advantage of a state program to become a nurse assistant. Then got a scholarship to a nursing program. Met my now husband while I was technically homeless. He had no idea. It was incredibly stressful because I could have been found out at any time. But yeah, if you're a young adult and ever find yourself in that situation, hanging around a large college campus is not a bad idea. A lot of kids look messy anyway, so you fit in. Sometimes there are food giveaways. And people are, well, wasteful. You can take advantage of what they discard. And a lot of people are generous too. I bummed a lot of guest meals in the cafeteria and whatnot. I found it very difficult to unwire from that state though. I still have to remind myself that I don't have to take advantage of certain things. And this all took place over 10 years ago. My mom was recently homeless in Baltimore, living in her car. Because she was too embarrassed to tell us. When I found out, I sent her the money to move in with me and my fiancée. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to RedditQueen for the best daily content.